Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Calling for systemic change. BC's Forest Advisory Council has just issued its final report for the future of the beleaguered industry, and it is urging a rethink of the industry altogether. We'll hear those recommendations and take your reaction on the open line. At 12:30, we'll take you to a rally in Surrey as they call for action on extortion. And how has the year of uncertainty affected your own financial decisions? Personal finance columnist Rubina Ahmed-Haq will join us with some tips. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. A new independent report from the Provincial Forestry Advisory Council has just been released in the last hour. And it says that BC's current forest management system is failing to meet the needs of communities, First Nations, businesses, and the environment. The report is called From Conflict to Care, BC's Forest Future. And it claims to identify, quote, outdated systems, limited access to trusted public data, and deep structural mismanagement as major drivers of ongoing conflict and instability. Gary Merkel is the co-chair of the Provincial Forestry Advisory Council.
No surprise or no, maybe serendipitous, today is Groundhog Day. And all of you have probably seen the movie. And this keeps happening over and over and over again. Anyways, this is about, we've had a lot of reviews, and this diagram looks a little bit like an eye. We just threw it up to illustrate that many of the past ones were done from either a single ministry or trying to deal with specific issues. A lot of other stuff came in and took priority, COVID, tariffs, healthcare crisis, et cetera, and or just this persistent instability. We never seem to be able to get anything done, and so.
Now, the recommendations include changes from a volume-based to a harvest-based system, a volume-based harvest system to area-based, as well as an independent assessment of old-growth forests, as well as independent oversight. So we're asking you, how should we rethink the forest industry in BC? You can call us now. Just hit pound 690 on your cell phone or dial 604-669-3733. That's 604-669-3733. You can also leave a comment by email. It's bctoday@cbc.ca. Or if you're joining us on TikTok, you can leave a comment there. Joining me now with initial reaction to this is Peter Wood. He's a professor at UBC's Faculty of Forestry and Environmental Stewardship. And I know you've been looking through the report, Peter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
How systemic, how sweeping are these changes being recommended today?
So at first glance here, it looks like this addresses many of the same issues that have been tossed around for years, if not decades. And it does call out a number of the structural issues that have been problematic. Ultimately, it talks about needing to implement some of the previous recommendations from the last major report of the Old Growth Strategic Review, which was issued over 5 years ago and which the government committed to implementing, but we have not really seen full implementation yet. So a lot of this is supposed to address and implement some of these actions. There are some very interesting ideas in here. Some things that are, I think, some bright lights of some interesting concepts. But I think there are still some major details that are left out that are quite critical.
Let me ask you before we move forward with what actually is in the report. What's missing, do you think?
So some of the bright lights that I see in this report is some discussion around the need for better information, need for more transparency. For the longest time, we've had a problem without really knowing how much old growth is left, for example, how are annual allowable cuts determined. Transparency generates trust when we have that information. And to date, we've kind of been reliant on NGO reports and third-party reports that have been calling for better information about how much old growth is left. For example, we have the Rachel Holt et al. Report, over 5 years ago, identified that we have less than 3% of some of our big tree old growth left. And yet that was kind of left to a bit of an argument in the media over, was that correct, even though that was a peer-reviewed, published, set of data. So, the idea that we'll have an agreed upon set of, facts is really important. And I like the idea of having that transparency. But again, a little bit more information I think is going to be necessary. Who gets to establish that? How is that process done? Seems to be a reliance on LiDAR, which is like a technological solution. Whereas I think there's also a need to get the buy-in from all the different stakeholders to have that kind of agreed set of facts. We're not just yelling fake news at each other when we don't agree on the outcomes. Other things that are positive here, I really like the idea of a more independent oversight of the industry. That comes through pretty strongly in their recommendations. But the question I have there is, compared to our Forest Practices Board, which we already have, but which has limited ability to actually impose sanctions or any kind of real penalties, and is ultimately just going to be upholding the existing law and rarely gets a chance to reflect on the adequacy of those laws. There's no mention of the Forest Practices Board that I can tell at my first glance. So I would be asking, what is different? We already have that forest watchdog. Are you going to give it teeth? Are you going to make it truly independent? Where right now, I think the board is appointed by government. So a few questions around that. Other major questions I have would be around this idea of changing the way that we do area-based management. So a lot of people are calling for a change in the way that tenure is done, the way that volume is issued. I think there's a lot of appetite for change there. So I was, excited to see there's, a call for a change to the way our forests are managed. They talk about regional forest management areas, but ultimately I would just ask, who's in charge? Are we talking about changing the power structure away from right now? There's a lot of emphasis on professional reliance and
who's
registered professional foresters. Right, or are we going to assign it to a more balanced body, and potentially involving more sort of community ownership or community decision making? There's some very exciting ideas there around wildland-urban interface, which I think will be appreciated as well.
Absolutely. When it comes to looking at forest management, you've really pointed out the key points, the key aspects of this that we could discuss. One is old growth inventory, independent oversight, as you said, looking for teeth there, and that regional land management system, moving away from the current kind of volume-based assessment. So we'll get into that more, and I'd love to hear some reaction from our listeners as well. What do you think of these ideas, and how do you think BC's forest industry should be changed? How should we rethink the industry as a whole, which is the recommendation overall, a systemic change from the Forest Practices Advisory Council today. So you can call us now. How should we rethink forestry in BC? 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or 1-800-825-5950. My guest is Peter Wood, professor at UBC's Faculty of Forestry and Environmental Stewardship, who's kindly looked over the report and given us some initial assessments of it. That press conference with Ravi Parmar, the Forest Minister, as well as the co-chairs of the council, is still going on right now as well. Let's take some calls right now. David is on the line in Nanaimo. And David, this is David Quigg from the Sierra Club. Hi, David. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much.
Yes. And so what are your thoughts on what you've been hearing so far?
Yeah, well, to sort of ground truth it, or to put it into perspective that we can all relate to, is you just need to take a flight across this province in any direction and look down. And you can see that forests are not being managed for long-term sustainability. They're exhausted, as David Eby himself said a couple of years ago. And if we're going to have a functioning forestry industry, we're going to have jobs. We can't just be thinking of volume. We have to be thinking of value, and we have to be giving First Nations the pathway that was promised to them for conservation, a choice not to log last remaining old growth, but the pathway to conserve for so many values, be it climate, be it carbon sequestration, cultural values, but also tourism. I mean, people come to this province to see beautiful BC, not to see ravaged clear cuts. So we need a huge rethink, and it will benefit so many sectors of our economy.
What do you make of that idea of the regional land management system having different voices? From this report, it seems to be they're looking for localized voices to manage an area-based system rather than, again, as you suggested, the volume-based approach that we have right now.
Well, 100%, because when, we have to live here like we belong here. And that goes for every community. When we are tied to the watershed, to the impacts, be it flooding, and we know now from Eunice Alila's reports that forestry can 18x, increase the impacts of flooding by an 18-fold measure if the watersheds are mismanaged. And this costs communities millions, if not billions of dollars, and harms residents in incredible ways. So this is really putting money in the bank for all of us. The forestry bank account is depleted. We have to be, living off the interest, not just gouging the capital. And that means community control for sure.
David, good to hear from you. Thanks so much for calling in. And our next caller is Richard in Victoria. Richard, I understand you've pulled over, which is great. You worked in forestry for a couple of decades. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. And so I got a pretty good look at various aspects of the industry. Mm-hmm. I just want to make a couple of broad statements and then try to narrow it down a little bit. I hope that management of our forest industry isn't given over too much to either side, whether that's industry that want to just go completely untrammeled, or not to pick on anyone, but the previous caller, or any sort of direction that essentially whose ideal would be zero forest industry functioning in the province. The pendulum, if we can just keep the pendulum from swinging too wildly in any direction, we'll be okay. And the thing is, and as for the regional, well, I do agree with that to some extent, but, the more diverse opinions that come into a discussion, the greater the chance of gridlock and nothing really getting accomplished. One of the most baffling things about the BC forest industry that I've never understood is why we have, and maybe your guest will correct me if I'm factually wrong in any area, but why we have given huge tracts of our forest land, given it to forest companies, often based out of the U.S., if I understand correctly, based on a promise of jobs for life and things like that, with nothing written down about that. And what happens is we've seen certain places on Vancouver Island where certain tree farm licenses in vast areas of forest have changed from one company to another, sometimes over the last 40 years, 4 or 5 different companies, usually American, all taking over, and in the meantime, the gutting continues. At one time, just north of Victoria, there was logging all night long with lights, 3 shifts. So we've really sort of, I want to try to take a middle ground and say, a lot of the environmental concerns will be naturally addressed if we simply stop giving our forests away for a diminishing number of jobs along the way, not to mention diminishing forest land. And one last thing, which the previous caller might agree more with than some of what I'm saying, is that I often walk out where in logged off areas, and we don't seem to have any guidelines these days about how close to streams that logging can be. There's rules. Sometimes it'll say something about fish-bearing streams, and that's really murky. What's considered that? But we are logging with leaving nothing but maybe a scraggly little row of maple trees, which are alongside really important streams that feed into larger rivers. So let's just try to be moderate. Is what I'm.
Those riparian rules and obligations. Richard, good to hear from you in Victoria. Thanks for sharing your thoughts and your experience as well. Let me start with Peter Wood here, my guest, who's a UBC professor in the Faculty of Forestry and Environmental Stewardship. That point about the role of U.S. companies and what impact has that had on the decline of the industry here in BC?
So BC industry has been controlled by a handful of very large companies for a long time, many of which are based in Canada, but the actual ownership is often a mixture of international investment, U.S. investment. It's a real mixed bag, but we have seen some of the reallocation of capital as some of those companies have come to the end of depleting some of their available supply. We've seen reinvestment in the southeast of the U.S. as a place where labor costs are lower and the trees grow faster. So I think some people often associate that transition with an American company making the decision, but it's now also be Canadian companies that are making those decisions as well. I think the caller also talks about the need to strike some kind of a balance. And I would just say that this is where the information, having good access to good information, is really important. Because if you ask me to achieve a balance, and we've logged 99% of an ecosystem, and you ask me to achieve balance, and the balance is, about what do we do with that remaining 1%, it's going to be a very different conversation if we all believe in what's left before we start talking about how to achieve balance. And what I find right now is the arguments often stem around, I think everybody wants to achieve a balance, but having an understanding of what we're actually dealing with in terms of the resource that's out there, I think is where we come into some big disagreements. So this report calling for better and more transparent information, I think is a welcome point.
Okay, thank you very much for those two calls getting us started. Frank is next in Courtney. What's needed when it comes to a rethink of BC forestry, Frank?
Well, I think we have to get rid of this notion of the annual allowable cut and looking only at timber volumes and replace it with a true ecosystem management. Because we have to recognize that timber and lumber are just one of many things that the forests give us. More important, I think, is the forest producing source of clean water, forest producing air, and forests being habitat for and ecosystems for biodiversity, all the things that live in it, besides trees.
Yeah. And so looking at, again, at that, the holistic role of the forests. And let me ask Peter, in this report, do you see a focus on, thinking about and considering the ecosystem when we're thinking about our approach to the forests?
So the authors position this whole report as a way to implement the old growth strategic review recommendations. The most important part of that was that we are to reverse the process of determining how much timber we extract from a landscape, and that we should be first and foremost looking at the values we want to protect and how do we make sure the forest maintains its resiliency and its health ultimately, and then look at how much timber can be extracted without compromising those values. So that paradigm shift is at the core. And if we can really keep focusing on that, that reversal of onus, so that the onus isn't on, people that want to protect salmon to see how they can protect salmon without compromising the timber values,
Right.
but the other way around where we say, okay, what's the bare minimum we need in order to make sure those salmon are going to be healthy? And then we look at the timber values. And similarly, with the knowledge now of how important forests are to preventing flooding, landslides, et cetera, you would want to say, okay, what does this watershed need at that scale to make sure that we have flood prevention in place? Then you see what kind of timber is possible without jeopardizing that forest health.
My guest is Peter Wood, professor at UBC's Faculty of Forestry and Environmental Stewardship. It's now 12:27. You're with BC Today. Let's take another call here as we ask you what's needed to rethink forestry in BC in light of the final report from the Provincial Forestry Advisory Council coming just within the last hour. Joe is next now in Nelson calling us. Thanks very much for joining us. Hi, Joe.
Hi, how's it going?
Very well. And you're the director of the Save What's Left Conservation Society. So tell us about
Yeah, that's right.
your thoughts on what's being proposed here and what you think is needed for forestry.
Yeah, for sure. So I've only had a chance to cursorily read over the
Sure.
report because it's just literally, it's 80 pages. But I have to hand it to the advisory council. They admit the system's broken, and I couldn't agree more with their assessment of deep structural mismanagement, and especially in regards to the Ministry of Forests. But what the report doesn't say clearly enough is that without legislative change, nothing is going to stop the ecological collapse the experts tell us is now accelerating. And it's not, but also it's not going to stop the economic hemorrhaging that BC's industrial forest model, like it simply wouldn't exist as we know it without the hundreds of millions of dollars in taxpayer-funded subsidies. I feel for the forestry workers. I run an excavation business myself. A lot of my friends are forestry workers. We can do things. We can do things differently. In May of 2025, I had a long conversation with PFAC's co-chair and the author of the Old Growth Strategic Review, who we heard from earlier on your show, Gary Merkel.
Yes.
And I prodded Gary hard on the potential for legislative changes in that conversation. And after a lot of prodding, he told me that there was really no political will right now for any sort of fast change. So my take is, if the Forest Act stays the same, it needs to be replaced. If annual allowable cuts continue to be set politically versus based on science, and if mapping used by the province continues to be wildly out of date, and if legislation acts like Biodiversity and Ecosystem Health Framework and the Old Growth Strategic Review are not implemented in legislation, nothing's going to change substantially enough for any of this work to matter. But so how do we think about it all? I think about it this way, that this report reminds us of the total failure of the leadership of the Premier's Office on Conservation.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Joe, thank you very much. That's Joe who called us from Nelson. He's the director of the Save What's Left Conservation Society, saying, okay, the report it seems to be a good start, calling for change, saying the system doesn't work right now, but it doesn't say enough about legislative changes. So let me end here with our guest, UBC Professor Peter Wood. Aptly named to talk about forestry. I'm sure you've heard that many times. I apologize.
No
But what kinds of legislative changes are needed then in order to actually push forward what's being called for in this report?
Well, I think what some people have been a little bit critical of is that while these discussions are happening, the old growth that is available to log is being logged not only continually, but actually faster than the surrounding area. So we've got, a recent report came out by Sierra Club showing that 4 times as much logging is happening in the areas that were identified as those that are supposed to be set aside compared to the sort of background rate of logging. So we've got a problem here where, some of these recommendations are being made. We're having these discussions. It's all well and good, but if you're having a conversation with someone, about what should be done, and what you're talking about is actively being eroded, it makes for a very different kind of conversation. So I think we need to restore some faith in the process by really taking a look at, those immediate high risk areas really need to be put on deferral just while we're having these conversations. So that's kind of just the first things first. But beyond that, I think that we also need to look at, how this gets put into legislation. We've got this biodiversity and ecosystem health framework, a really, really good proposal on the table. That's been sitting around for quite a while, ready to happen and ready to be invoked. Again, a lot of this does not require, reinventing the wheel, but just putting in place things that have already been committed to. We need to see, First Nations having, a strong role to play here, but we also need to listen to the First Nations that are also calling for less logging, as well as those that are calling for active management, and being able to provide, funding and resources for those nations that decide to accept the deferrals or less logging on their landscape. How are we ensuring that those communities continue to be whole?
Those still unresolved, those conversations still unresolved. Really good to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me.
That's Peter Wood, professor at UBC's Faculty of Forestry and Environmental Stewardship. It's 12:33 now. You're with BC Today. Thanks for joining us. I'm Michelle Elliott. Right now, let's take you to the CBC Vancouver newsroom. And here's a CBC update with Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. Former Cabinet Minister Bill Blair is resigning from his Toronto seat in the House of Commons to take on a new role as Canada's High Commissioner to the United Kingdom. Prime Minister Mark Carney will also appoint Nathalie Drouin, the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, as Canada's ambassador to France and Monaco. As we've been hearing on the show, a review of forestry in BC is calling for the system to be raised and rebuilt, with a shift away from managing harvest volumes to managing lands. The final report from the Provincial Forestry Advisory Council says trust has been eroded by inconsistent forest data. And Surrey police say they are working with the Canada Border Services Agency as part of the investigation into what's believed to be the latest extortion attempt. 3 men were arrested yesterday following an early morning shooting. No one was injured, but there was damage to a home. And now the forecast. A wind warning is in effect for Haida Gwaii, with gusts reaching 110 kilometers an hour. On the north coast, a chance of showers this afternoon with a high of 8. Highs up to 8 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, showers with a high of 4. Highs reaching 6 with a few showers in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, some showers with a high of 6 as well. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, periods of rain or drizzle this afternoon with highs around 10. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Rob, thank you very much. Thanks for waiting a couple of minutes there while we wrapped up.
No problem.
That's Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. This is BC Today here on CBC. Thanks for joining us. And we take you now live to Surrey, where there is a protest taking place this hour. And it's calling for stronger enforcement on the extortion crisis. And this weekend, 3 men were arrested after another alleged extortion-related shooting in Surrey. It happened at a home in the Crescent Beach neighborhood early yesterday morning. There was damage to the home, but no reports of injuries. CBC reporter Sohrab Sandhu is at the protest right now. Hi, Surrab. Thanks for being with us. Can you describe the scene there right now?
Hi, Michelle. On this wet and soggy Monday afternoon, anybody passing through the intersection of King George and 88th Avenue in Surrey can't help but notice this group of protesters behind me who have these signs in their hand, who are trying to get public attention and support for this extortion issue that has plagued the city for almost 2 years now. There are a lot of people here who are honking in support of these people who are here to show that they want an immediate action against this extortion issue.
I see some of the signs there saying safety is a right, extortion is crime, say no to threats. There's been real frustration in the community, Sohrab, over this as the cases mount. Who have you heard from today?
Well, I have, spoken to the organizer of the event, and she says she is trying to drum up support, get people to talk about this issue. With last couple of years that we have been reporting on this issue, many people that we have spoken to, the community members, they are fearful to come forward and speak about this issue because they worry about their own safety. So the organizer of today's event, she says she is trying to get people to come out and get attention to this matter and get all levels of government to act decisively on this issue.
It has been a matter of discussion, absolutely, with the different levels of government, with the Premier being meeting with the Prime Minister last week. We've heard from the Mayor of Surrey on this, of course, Brenda Locke, many times, and now she would like this to be declared a national emergency. What are people saying about what they're hearing? What kinds of actions do they want from these levels of government?
Michelle, one thing is really clear, that people want stricter laws, stricter action against the perpetrators of these crimes. They say that they want examples to be made out of, these people being caught and being awarded sentences. And they say that they want stricter laws. Some of them want, laws around self-defense change. Some are calling for stricter sentences. They want all levels of government to come together and make an example out of these cases. And the hope is that these stricter sentences could result in deterring people from indulging in these sort of extortion crimes.
Sohrab, I know you've been covering this issue on an ongoing basis. Thank you so much for joining us from this protest today.
Thank you, Michelle.
That's CBC reporter Sohrab Sandhu reporting live from Surrey. 12:38 now, and let's tell you about the Grammy Awards yesterday. They did take place yesterday, and the big winner, Bad Bunny, at the 60th Annual Grammy Awards, of course. Now, the artist went home with 3 awards, including Album of the Year. And he also went home with the Best Global Music Performance and Best Musica Urbana Album for Debí Tirar Más Fotos. And that song is amazing. I love that song. He becomes the first artist to win Album of the Year for an album completely produced in Spanish.
I want to dedicate this award to all the people that had to leave their homeland, their country, to follow their dreams, para todas las personas que han perdido un ser querido y aún así han tenido que seguir hacia adelante. Eyes out. We're not savage, we're not animals, we're not aliens, we are humans and we are Americans. The hate gets more powerful with more hate. The only thing that is more powerful than hate is love.
Now, Billie Eilish, Olivia Dean, other artists also used their own Grammy wins to protest ICE enforcement across the country. Many were wearing ICE out pins during the show. Now, on a lighter note, the artist behind the song Golden from Netflix's K-pop Demon Hunters took home Best Song Written for Visual Media. There's a Canadian connection there as well. And so EJ, Audrey Nuna, and Rayami were the singing voices behind that fictional K-pop group, Hunter X. It was a really great show yesterday. I enjoyed it. Also, some very good tributes to people we've lost in the music industry: Ozzy Osbourne, Roberta Flack, and D'Angelo. 12:40 now. This is BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thanks so much for being with us. All right. Well, you may be thinking about your finances as we get going into 2026. We're also in the midst of RRSP season. And needless to say, all the uncertainty of the last year has affected a lot of people's financial planning. So with so much unknown, how has that affected your own financial decisions? And what are your own questions about managing your money this year? You can give us a call now. Just hit pound 690 on your cell phone or dial 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, 604-669-3733. Or if you'd like to email, bctoday@cbc.ca. And we are watching your comments on our TikTok as well. Joining me now is Rubina Ahmed-Haq, CBC's personal finance columnist and also a certified financial counselor. Rubina, hello. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for making this topic important. I think it's a good time to talk about it.
It really is. And, you know, it's been 1 year since all the trade tensions began, right? So over this last year, how has that affected the way people are approaching financial decisions?
People are nervous. They're nervous about their jobs. They're nervous about their savings. So, you know, where can I invest my money? Where is my money safe?
Right.
They're nervous about the cost of living. So as you know, they go to the grocery store, they see prices are going higher. They want to book a trip to take their family, maybe for a summer holiday somewhere. That's more expensive. And that is all really playing into overall how we feel about our money. So increased financial anxiety and lack of financial confidence. And that's not a good place to be when you're trying to make even medium-term financial goals. So you want to do something 2-3 years from now. It's difficult to plan for that if you're not feeling good about the right now.
Oh, we're seeing certainly the impact of that on the housing market, for example. Can you explain something to me? So yes, there's a lot of uncertainty that has caused a slowdown in real estate for one thing, but yet markets have been hitting record highs. How do you explain that?
Well, a lot of that is what Donald Trump and the U.S. government is doing. You know, despite how we may feel about what's going on, they are making decisions that are very business friendly. And that has really boded well for especially the American market. So a lot of people will invest, for example, broadly in the S&P 500. So that's the 500 largest companies in the U.S. And so when you're invested in companies that are benefiting or at least hoping to benefit from business friendly decisions made by the government, the markets tend to do better. Money is also a little bit cheaper than it was just a couple of years ago. The interest rate hasn't come down as dramatically in the U.S. as it has in Canada, but usually when money gets cheaper, individuals are more likely to invest money because it's easier to do so. So it's a couple of factors, and as your question sort of suggests, it is confusing because tariffs seem on business unfriendly. Not having good relationships with your allies doesn't seem very business friendly. But big corporations seem to like what is happening at the top, and that is driving at least those companies to feel more confident that their taxes will be lower and their cost of doing business. Environmental protections being stripped back as well is making it easier for companies to profit without actually having to pay for the consequences of polluting the environment, for example.
So for regular folk, how does that all play out for us? What should we be thinking as we move ahead into 2026 then?
It's so difficult for us to look beyond our own personal situation and to look beyond what's happening right now. But I really want to encourage people to look back to everything that we have been through and how that seemed like it was impossible and we were never going to get through it. So even going back to 2008, 2009 during the financial crisis, more recently, the pandemic. So when things are happening in front of you, and this is really where the financial wellness piece comes in, it can really have an effect on the way you feel about your money, the way that you feel about making decisions about your money going forward. So I really want to give people confidence in knowing that this too as well will pass. We will eventually get through this period of whatever it is that we are going through.
I'll take your word for it.
Exactly. And that, the same principles remain, investing money for the long term, keeping your long-term goals in mind, keeping retirement top of mind, and not getting too swayed by headline news and trying to time the market or make money quickly.
Right. Timing the market, I've heard from Mark Ting, who's our a columnist here and on the coast, says not such a great idea. What do you think?
Never. Yeah. I agree with you 100%.
Let's put out our phone numbers again. My guest, CBC personal finance columnist Rubina Ahmed-Haq, and a certified financial counselor. We're asking you, how has the uncertainty of the last year affected your own financial decision making? How are you approaching 2026? Do you have any big decisions that you need to make? And what are your questions about that? How you're going to make your choice, how you're going to manage your money. Let us know what you need to know. What are the questions that you want answered as you go about making your financial decisions? 604-669-3733. 604-669-3733, 1-800-825-5950. You can just hit pound 690 on your cell phone if you like as well. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. And Rubina, you mentioned interest rates, and we just saw that the Bank of Canada held them steady last week. I think it was at 2.25%. What should we take from that? Is it possible to look ahead and say which way it's going to go?
It's very difficult right now to tell what is going to happen with interest rates in 2026, but there are a few key events that are coming up that I think are worth paying attention to because they could impact the Bank of Canada's decision. Of course, we are still negotiating our new trade relationship with the United States, so that could have an impact depending on how happy we are with the result of that and how business friendly it is. Because if it's not business friendly, the Bank of Canada might feel that they need to cut rates in order to stimulate the economy, in order to get businesses here in Canada spending again. The other thing is the GST rebate. Now, it still needs royal assent, but this is an injection of money that is going to go into lower and middle income families. And that money will be used, hopefully, in the economy. So those families will go out and spend money on food and household items. And so it could have a slight inflationary impact where we could see the interest rate, the inflation rate go above 3%. And if that was the case, the Bank of Canada may feel obligated to raise interest rates slightly to deal with that. The other is there's going to be a change in the Fed Reserve Chairman in the United States. We know that Donald Trump has been very critical of Jerome Powell, who was appointed by him actually in the first time he was president, but he's been critical of him recently for not cutting rates. He's putting someone in place in May that could go in a different direction, and Canada might have to follow. If they start to cut rates aggressively, we may have to follow in order to stay in step with their with the economy that is being set up.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. How in step do we have to be with the United States?
So up until a few years ago, if the U.S. Federal Reserve cut rates, we cut rates because our economies were so intertwined. We had free trade, and so we were very much dependent on their economy and our economy being sort of simpatico and working together. That has not been the case in the last few years. In fact, our interest rate is much lower. Theirs is in the 3% range, as ours is 2.25%. And so we don't necessarily follow what the U.S. Federal Reserve does, but if they do something dramatic, we are forced to make a decision in order for us to stay competitive, in order for us to stay attractive to international investment. And so that's something definitely that could have an impact on our interest rates.
We are taking questions to Rubina Ahmed-Haq here on the show. And here's an email. We'll put out the numbers again. 604-669-3733. 604-669-3733. 1-800-825-5950. We have an email to bctoday@cbc.ca. And Allison writes from Vancouver, what are the projections for Bitcoin this year? Can I count on it I knew this was coming. You knew this was coming at some point, right? Can I count on it to bounce back up in 2026 so I can pay for some of my upcoming large expenses? Yeah.
So Bitcoin is still, there's still a lot of unknown about it as to what it's going to look like in our everyday life. We know that cryptocurrency is here to stay. We don't necessarily know how we're going to be using it. And so I would not bet on it, if that's the word I can use, to pay your bills. In fact, I wouldn't bet on anything when it comes to investments to pay any big bills. Really, if you are investing, say, for example, in Bitcoin, it should represent a very small part of your portfolio. I'd say less than 2%. So if you have $100,000 portfolio, less than $2,000 should be in Bitcoin. And the reason I say that is if that currency was to go to zero or all of a sudden lose half its value, it wouldn't derail all your investment efforts. And so, if you believe in cryptocurrency, if you believe in Bitcoin, you are doing it with confidence. I think that you should still be doing it for the long term. So I'm talking 5, 10, 15 years, not as something that you can bet on today and then pay your bills in October. That's really what gambling is, right? So those short-term bets that a lot of us make when we're at the casino, like we make quick money. If you're looking to make quick money, the stock market, even cryptocurrency is really not that place to do that.
It's interesting with the rise in Bitcoin. This is just my observation. I'm not. You can correct me if this is this is wrong, but it seems like there's been more of an interest in do-it-yourself investing and that kind of thing. What's your own observation on that, and how should people approach it?
So DIY investing is one of my favorite things. I think it's been one of the biggest equalizers when it comes to investments, because up until 25 years ago, you had to go through a broker, you had to pay very high brokerage fees. The information, they kept it under wraps. They didn't always give you all the info that you needed. Now, every big bank has detailed information and detailed history of every single investment that you could buy. It has analysts' opinions about whether it's a good buy or a sell or a hold. So you can get so much information. So DIY investing can be scary, but I think if you arm yourself with the right information, you understand what your investment personality is. So are you a conservative investor? Are you someone who can take some risk? Are you younger so you have time to take risk? As long as you can answer some of those questions, I don't think there's anything wrong with do-it-yourself investing or discount brokerage. Every bank has one. There's a lot of smaller companies will also offer it. And the commissions are very low now, so it's much more accessible. And so I think that's a great thing. I think most of us have the ability to manage our own money, and that starts with understanding where our investments are.
Yeah, at least there's it's generated that kind of understanding. Has that fueled a demand from banks and smaller outlets then? Like, are they trying to keep up with the interest that seems to be growing in the public?
With Bitcoin specifically?
No, not Bitcoin, but DIY investing and just kind of more of that knowledge. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, every bank has a discount brokerage. Like, for example, Scotia has iTrade and TD Bank has TD Waterhouse, which I think they call it TD Direct Investing. I mean, every big bank has one. There's Wealth Simple, which is a very popular company that a lot of people invest with. They have low commissions. They also have model portfolios. You can go in there and kind of get an idea of, what your investment personality is. So I think if you are thinking of investing on your own, that you should explore all the options with the big banks, with the smaller outfits, with the companies that have low, sometimes no commission if you have a certain balance in your investments. Technology has made access to information that much more easier. You can scroll on your phone and get the same kind of data and analytics that, once upon a time was only available to the individuals who worked on trade floors. And now anyone can access it. And as long as you understand it, you can make those decisions with confidence.
There's key, as long as you understand it.
There's
the key word there. We have an emailed question from Carol, who writes, I need to renew my mortgage in a month's time. Yes, so many Canadians do, right? Should I look at a variable rate, knowing that I can change to a fixed rate in the future? Should I look at a 1, 3, or 5-year term? Yeah, great question.
Yeah, that is a great question. And it's something that I get asked all the time, because making a decision about your mortgage is a massive decision about your personal finances, because it determines, of course, what the payment is going to be. It helps you make plans for, if you're getting a 5-year term, for example, for the next 5 years. So, I can only look at what history has told us. So historically, variable rate has saved Canadians money. So if you go for a variable rate mortgage, historically, it has saved money. Now, in the last 5 years, that has not been the case. And a lot of people have been scared out of a variable rate mortgage for that reason. Yeah. So again, you want to ask yourself, if I'm getting a fixed rate that's pretty close to the variable rate, does that give me the confidence, help me sleep at night, know that I can make my payments? That sometimes is more valuable than the actual payment that you're making. Whether you go 1, 2, 3, 5 years, that's really, depending on if you're going to be in your house for the long term, I would take a longer term mortgage because more than likely you can negotiate a better rate. And remember, these things change from time to time as well. So you want to stay on top of the latest news, the latest Bank of Canada announcements, and make sure that you're getting the best rate possible. This year, a record amount of Canadian mortgages are coming up for renewal, the 5-year fixed ones that were set back in 2021. So there's going to be a lot of people wondering about this exact same scenario and what the best course of action is for them.
That's so true. Carol, yes, you are one of so many wondering absolutely the same thing. All right, here we go. Okay, gold or silver, right? Those kinds of questions coming up now too. Nathan is sending us an email from Vancouver. I have some old silver coins. Should I hang on to them or sell them now?
I definitely get them appraised to see how much they're actually worth. So go and do that much so that you know what you're actually looking at. If you don't need the money, silver has been doing very well. I mean, these are safe haven investments when people are worried about what's happening in the market, worried about what's happening with the economy. Oftentimes gold and silver prices go up. And gold especially, for example, this month in January, it has gone up more than it has in the last, since 1937, since when records were first taken.
Goodness.
So it's been an incredible run for gold in the last little while. And that's been the story all throughout 2025. So I would go get it appraised. And then if you need the money, go for it. Go and see if you can get that value for it. I wouldn't use the money on consumable items. Maybe I'd use it to make another investment. So invest in the stock market, maybe put some money into your RRSP, because it is an investment that you've been hanging on to. I wouldn't use it to go on a vacation unless it's something, unless you've got all the other investments taken care of.
Right.
This may be a good opportunity to get ahead on something.
Prioritize. Yeah, all the hot topics there. I have a minute left, Rubina, but it is RRSP season. Any bit of advice you can leave us with?
Yeah, so there's about 1 month. March 3rd is the deadline this year to make an RRSP contribution that can be counted towards the 2025 tax year. You should be getting most of your tax information now, how much money you made in 2025, how much income tax you paid, how many RRSP contributions you made. If, putting in $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, if you can afford to do so, is going to give you that bigger return and you can afford to do so, why not? Invest the money, get that return, kickstart your 2026 savings. But don't do it just because the deadline's coming up. The healthier way to look at your retirement is, if you didn't save enough in 2025, is to say, okay, what can I do this year so that I'm not stressed about it next year at this time? So that's setting up automatic contributions. That's understanding what you're investing in. That's a much healthier approach than trying to rush and get that last minute contribution in.
Rubina, thank you.
Thank you.